1 Corinthians chapter 3. So we're going to have our first reading. When you get your Bibles open there, 1 Corinthians 3. Glad you're here. Sure excited to be back for these first lessons. Thinking yesterday at some point, it was March was the last time we were here at this hour, at this study. And it's wonderful to be back and so thankful that we are. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul dealing with one of the first issues, the Corinthian letter, meaning the first half of the book, first 3/4 of the book, I guess. So Paul dealing with issues that he had found out that he was aware of. One of those issues was just that they had sectioned themselves off. There was division among the church, and one of the reasons he's making note of that and saying here's what led to that was this character trait that kind of just ate them up. Look in verse 3, 1 Corinthians 3, verse 3. He's asking somewhat of a rhetorical question. Are you not carnal? Or do you not still think like fleshly people? So you haven't changed your mindset. You become a Christian, but you're still thinking like you used to think. Are you not carnal? Are you still fleshly minded? For whereas there is among you envying, jealousy, strife, divisions, and then he asks the question, are you not carnal? Don't you still walk like others? He says, you're not any different. You're just like everybody else walking around this town, and it's because of selfishness. It's because of envy. It's because of jealousy. And that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at an example of jealousy. Go back to Numbers chapter 12. Jealousy is something that we have to deal with. Children aren't immune to it. And then we become adults, still having to deal with it. We go into the workforce, still dealing with it. Become Christians, still having to deal with it. It's still there. Philippians chapter 1 gave an example of where preachers, Paul talked about preachers that were preaching out of envy and strife. Kind of interesting. He used the same words as he did in 1 Corinthians 3, verse 3. Except he was talking about preachers. For some reason, there were preachers maybe with jealousy of Paul and maybe the respect people had for him and the esteem I don't know why. We don't have the details. But they would preach him, but they would eat up with envy and jealousy about Paul. It's an emotion. Jealousy is an emotion that makes us do illogical things. And we're going to see one in just a minute. But there are times we look back at our life and why would we have done that? Well, that was so silly. Jealousy makes you do silly things. And it makes us do strange things. And Numbers 12 is an example of it. Not only the action itself and the emotion itself, but it's also an example of how God reacted to it. And it wasn't very favorably. So let's just spend our time today. Let's look at just Numbers chapter 12. We'll flip a couple of times, but for the most part, we're just going to camp here if you want to put your marker there. But first of all, let's get the event. Verse 1, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses. Now you can guess what that speaking against is going to be about. They spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman who he had married. He had married an Ethiopian woman. And they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Has he not also spoken by us? And so the event was, the thing that leapfrogged this. Moses has married an Ethiopian. And Miriam and Aaron used that event. They used that opportunity to voice this issue. And they felt justified in their attack. Now, what we're going to see is the marriage had nothing to do with it. That was just what it launched from. It was just pretext. The real, how often, many times in our life, if we look back and we see some things where something's building up and we're upset and we're disappointed and we don't like it, and then something happens that has nothing to do with that, but that's what gets us rolling. That's what gets it poured out. This happens that has nothing to do with the real thing, but when this happens, we spew it. See, that's what jealousy is. It starts inside. It's a heart issue. It's a mind issue. But it eventually comes out. And it eventually came out at this marriage. Again, the marriage had nothing to do with it. The Holy Spirit does not tell us there was anything wrong with this marriage. Whatever it is that whatever that caused this, it wasn't the marriage. That was the event that led to this finally having a conversation that apparently they've been stewing over for a good while. It's a superficial issue, but it comes out. The real issue is jealousy. They considered themselves Moses' equal. In verse 2, who do you think you are? Are you the only one God talks to? Do you not understand that He's spoken through us as well? And yet here you are, always on the pedestal, always in this elite position. Hey, we're prophets too, buddy. A couple of things before we get into how God responded. It seems to be that Miriam is the ringleader of this. There are two things, one within the text and one that we could just maybe make a logical inference from. The one from the text that you have to go back and you go read on this on your own. The Hebrew language is like a lot of languages today. There is masculine and feminine within it. The English language doesn't have that. Spanish does. Table in Spanish is mesa, M-E-S-A. And when a word ends in A, it's a feminine word. If it ends in O, it's a masculine word. English doesn't have that dynamic. Most of the Romance languages do. The Hebrew language has it as well. And when you look in verse 1, when it talks about Miriam and Aaron spoke, that's the word for spoke there is the feminine verb of that, the feminine version of that. And so the language, you have to go back and know the Hebrew for that. I don't know it. I'm telling you what the researchers, the one who can read it, that's what the commentators tell us. This was the feminine word. And then when you look at the punishment was to Miriam, not to Aaron. It seems to be Miriam is the leader of this. And so as a real quick aside character study of Aaron, maybe his problem is he's a follower. Do you remember the golden calf? Aaron didn't ringlead that. Aaron didn't come up with that. He just kind of stood back and let it happen on his watch. It seems to be just like that event. Aaron isn't the ringleader here, but he stands there as Miriam does it, and he's with consent. But the issue is envy and jealousy. And we're as good as you are. And we're tired of not being elevated like you are. We're prophets too. It's a powerful thing, envy is. It took over their natural affection. Moses is their brother. Miriam helped raise him. She was the one when he was put in the basket and he was taken into the home of Pharaoh, into the palace itself. But she became like a servant there. And she's able to watch. Miriam helped raise him. And yet here, jealousy and envy has even overcome the fleshly relationship they have. Does that sound familiar? Maybe too familiar? Too close for home? There's been a lot of families destroyed because of this. It blinded them. Not only did it overcome this emotion or a natural affection that they should have had, it also blinded them to their very honorable works. Aaron and Miriam were prophet and prophetess. When Moses was at the burning bush, I just don't talk well enough. Lord, please pick somebody else. Take your brother with you. Take your brother with you. He is a good speaker. He can help you. When they came across the Red Sea, the night the waters parted, Miriam led a song. She takes all the ladies off and she leads them in this incredible song of praise. Exodus 15, we talk about the Psalms. The first song that we hear about is in Exodus 15. A long time before David and Solomon started writing music out in Psalms, and Miriam is there. They had important roles. They were gifted people, but they're not content people. And it's spewing out. And it's coming out like it always eventually does. Look at the last phrase in verse 2. The Lord heard it. And so just as a real quick aside for us, we're going to see how Moses responds in just a moment. But before we do that, Moses has been attacked. He's been attacked by those that he loves. He's been attacked by those that we would think of as being most close to him. It's an unfair attack. And God heard every word of it. So take that to heart the next time you are attacked. The next time we are evil spoken of. The next time it's us that's being falsely accused of something. God hears it. He hears every time something evil is said about his people, and let that give us some comfort. Not if it happens, but when it happens. If we live long enough, it already has, and it will again. Don't think God's not aware of that. He heard what they said about Moses. And it's interesting that he's the one who deals with it. There's an aside in verse 3. Some even have it in a parenthesis. It's just a statement to give us some context. And it talks about the humility of Moses. A very humble man. He's not a selfish man. They have made a charge that is absolutely not true. And all we have to do is go to the prior chapter to see this. After there was a time, remember the responsibility that Moses had. I mean, he's leading what could very easily have been a couple of million people. And there's the constant yeah-yan, and there's the constant just murmuring and complaining, and he's dealing with that. And there was a time even when his family comes to him and says, you've got a lot on your plate. Pick some people, let others help you. And there was a time when God did that. God allowed other people to take some leadership and to take some roles. Actually, he began to speak through them. Look in chapter 11, verse 27. There ran a young man. Chapter 11, just one chapter before, verse 27. There ran a young man to Moses, and it said, Eldad and Medad, they're prophesying in the camp, Moses. Did you know there's other people now prophesying? Verse 28. Joshua, that's the Joshua, the one that will take over from Moses, who leads them through the conquering period. Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of Moses, one of his young men, answered him and said, My Lord, tell him to stop. Moses, you're the spokesman, buddy. You're the prophet. Don't go tell those people to hush. Verse 29, Moses said, Are you jealous for my sake? It's almost said, I'm not jealous about it. Are you jealous? Are you jealous about this? I'm not. Are you envious for my sake? I wish that all the people were prophets. I wish that the Lord would put his spirit on all of them. Moses is not a jealous man. He's not an envious man. And when God let others begin to prophesy, to kind of take some of the pressure off, and Moses wasn't upset about that. His other people were. Joshua was upset about it. And tell him to quit. That's your role. I wished everybody had what I had. I wished everybody could speak for the Lord like I can. Verse 3, back in chapter 12, the text, he's a meek man. And it's in parentheses as an aside to let us know he just kind of took the rebuke. Moses doesn't defend himself. He doesn't tell his brother and sister, hey, let me give you my side of the story. He doesn't assert himself into what could have become an argument. The interesting thing is, God takes up the quarrel for him. God is the one who answers. We sing sometimes, we know the phrase, the Lord is on your side. This kind of ups the ante of that a little bit, doesn't it? It's almost as if God here, if you can put this in a courtroom setting, it's as if God begins to be the lawyer for Moses. He's the one who speaks for him. He doesn't speak for himself. It's as if Moses is the client. He's been falsely charged of something, and now God becomes his defense attorney. God speaks for him. God answers the complaint. God answers the charge. And here's what we're fixing to see. Mark your spot and turn to James chapter 4. Let's look at a New Testament principle that's as true now as when it was written. And the interesting thing is that when it was written, even thousands of years before that, it had already played out. We're going to see it in this very event that we're looking at. James chapter 4. Look in verse 6. The last phrase in verse 6. God opposes the proud, gives grace to the humble. So in verse 6, he makes the contrast between the arrogant and the humble. Look in verse 10. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will exalt you. Humble yourself, and he will raise you up. And now go back to Numbers 12. That is exactly what's fixing to happen. He's fixing to oppose the haughty. Aaron and Miriam are about to be challenged from heaven itself. Verse 3 talks about the humility of Moses, the most humble that there was at that time. And then this principle from the Holy Spirit, humble yourself, which Moses has done. Humble yourself. The Lord will exalt you. You don't have to exalt yourself. God will do that. We're going to see that play out. So let's look at both of them. Let's look first of all at how the humble is exalted. Let's read verses 5 through 8, then we'll go back and make application. The Lord came down. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, we never did read verse 4, did we? The Lord spoke suddenly unto Moses and Aaron and Miriam. Come out, you three, to the tabernacle of the congregation, and they came out. So this is God not making a public thing of this at the time. This was, he knows what Miriam and Aaron have said. It was apparently it seems to be a private conversation. And God said, okay, I want you three at the tabernacle. Quick, fast, in a hurry. Get there. And then when they are there, now this conversation taking place not between the whole group, the whole company, God, Moses, Miriam, and Aaron. Verse 5, the Lord came down in the pillar of the cloud, and he stood in the door of the tabernacle, and he called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward. So he calls them out. And now he begins to defend Moses, who did not defend himself. He said, hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him in a vision, and I will speak unto him in a dream. My servant Moses is not so, who is faithful in all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth, even apparently and not in dark speeches. And the form of the Lord shall be beheld. Wherefore, then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? Moses, who do you think you are? We're prophets. We're just like you. God speaks to us. You're no better than us. And I want you all at the tabernacle. And he gets them there, and he calls Miriam and you step up. And then he begins to talk about Moses to them. A couple of phrases to pull out. In verse 7, he talks about Moses' faithfulness. The idea for that word faithful in that verse, it's the idea of how firm he was. He is firm. He is reliable. He is trustworthy. He does what I ask him to do. He's dependable. That's the idea behind faithful there. And then in verse 5, he begins to distinguish the difference between Moses as a prophet and all the others. In verse 6, actually. He says, if there's a prophet among you, and Miriam and Aaron were prophets, right? He's talking about them even. If there's a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known unto him in a vision, in a dream. This was a Bible class. I just said, can you think of some examples where God, to a prophet, let himself be known in a vision? I don't know where you are in your time frame. I know you're studying the narrative of the Bible. I know it wasn't very long ago you were in the captivity period. You may still be, I don't know. But when you was in the captivity period, you would have studied about Ezekiel. And Ezekiel starts with Ezekiel sitting by the river Charbar in Babylon. And he looks up and here's this vision. He sees this chariot kind of thing. Wheels are spinning both directions, but there's no axle. And he's looking. Ezekiel saw a vision. Can you think of someone who prophesied through dreams? In Babylon, by the way, you don't even have to leave Babylon. Daniel talking about worldly nations and the rising and falling of powers and leaders. And it was because of interpretations of dreams. When I have a prophet, I speak through vision. When I have a prophet, I speak through dreams. When I talk to Moses, verse 8, it's mouth to mouth. Miriam, I don't talk to him like I do you. Aaron, I don't prophesy through him like I do you. You imagine you're sitting on a couch, somebody on the other end of it, taking a nap, maybe dreaming, but you don't know what they're dreaming. You don't see it. They're in the dream, maybe they are hearing something. There's a conversation going on in a dream, but you're sitting at the same couch with them. You don't hear that conversation. Can you picture that maybe as God's working with prophets? Ezekiel was not the only person by the river Chebar, but he's the only one that saw that vision. Nobody else saw it. When Jacob had his dream about that ladder, nobody else would have seen that. I speak to Moses audibly, mouth to mouth, face to face. And then it talks about him being seen by his form. We don't know what that was. And neither did Miriam and Aaron. That was for Moses and Moses alone. God did him differently. There was this, to whatever extent and however we want to describe it, but there was this direct contact and there was this familiar contact that even other prophets didn't have. And Aaron and Miriam, they would have been oblivious to this because Moses would have told them. That takes us back to verse 3. The most humble of people, the most meek of people. He wouldn't have bragged about it. He wouldn't have gone to them and said, hey, God does me differently than you. No, they had no idea until right here. They had no idea until God himself tells them about it. He had no successor. There was nobody like him. As a matter of fact, kind of interesting. In verse 7, my servant Moses, faithful in all my house. That's the verse that the Hebrew writer uses to compare Moses to Jesus. There was nobody like Moses on earth at that time, and there was nobody like him until Jesus himself. And then there was the Hebrew writers making it known that he was better. Moses faithful in the house. Hebrews chapter 2 talks about Jesus being faithful over the house. But there was nobody like him. And there was no successor as a lawgiver until Christ himself came. And so what you got is James chapter 4. Humble yourself, and I'll exalt you. Miriam and Aaron intended to bring Moses down. God instead just establishes them even higher. He just elevates him to a higher plane by comparing them to him. And so let's talk about the opposite side of that. Humble yourself, God will exalt you. God opposes the haughty. Let's look and let's see what happens as the proud are humbled. We've seen the humble exalted in Moses. Now we see the proud brought down. Look in verse 10. I'm sorry, actually, listen, we skipped to verse 9, didn't we? Verse 9, the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. He asked the question in verse 8, were you not afraid? It's almost as if I can't believe you would say what you said about my faithful servant. My faithful servant. And yet you are going to question the faithfulness of mine? I decide if my servants are faithful or not. How dare you question that? How dare you argue that? How dare you speak against him? And then verse 9, he said that he's angry about that. The cloud departed, verse 10, from the tabernacle. And behold, Miriam became leprous, white as snow. God disappears. God leaves. The conversation is over. The debate is over, to whatever extent you want to call it a debate. And now, judgment being passed. And We're now looking at, there's some things that happens as consequences. The first one is there was personal uncleanness. Leviticus 13, which had been given while they were still at Mount Sinai, just an entire chapter talking about the uncleanness of leprosy and how they were to be treated, how they were to be checked. And in verse 10, when it talks about white as snow, that means she goes from 0 to 60 in 0.2 seconds. She has a full-blown case of it. She's not a leper with a spot. Oh, you might want to go get that checked out. No, she's covered. She's eat up with it in the blink of an eye. God disappears. You look around, and the sister of these two men, white as snow, leprous. Aaron looked on Miriam, and she was a leper. This horrible outbreak representing, she's now got this horrible physical outbreak, which is representing what was going on inside of her. Look in Proverbs chapter 14. Just hold your spot. We're coming right back to it. But look in Proverbs chapter 14. One of those hidden proverbs that never gets looked at very much, but it has a place now. Again, this is a symbolism. She has this horrible outward disease that anybody could have seen, white as snow. But what's really going on is this horrible disease inside of her called envy and jealousy, and she's full of it. Proverbs 14, verse 30, a sound heart is like the life of the flesh, but envy is rottenness to the bones. And that's why jealousy, to go back to our introduction, that's why jealousy makes us do such silly things. It's what makes us do stuff that we look back on and say, what in the world why would I have ever done that, thought that, said that? It's because this attacks and it goes in deep. Rotten to the bone. That's the real problem with Miriam. She's eaten up with something. It has gone to her core, but you can't see it by looking. But it's come out. It came out at that wedding feast. Now it's known. And here's God putting an outward sign on her of uncleanness. Just representing how unclean she was inside for a long, long time. So there's this physical outward consequence. I don't have it. We won't turn to Galatians 5, but this rottenness to the bones, jealousy and envy is a part of the works of the flesh. One of those things that it says, don't you know? You can't inherit the kingdom of God with that. It'll take away our inheritance in the spiritual realm. That's how deep it could go. And that's what God thinks of it. And so what happened with her? Drop back into verse 15. Miriam was shut from the camp for 7 days. She's ostracized. And we know why. Leprosy was contagious. Get away. You can't be in your tent. You can't be in the camp. You can't be with us. She is now put aside because leprosy was a contagious thing. Sin is a contagious thing. She's eaten to the bone with some sin. And that could be an application of why God requires church discipline. It's why we can't put ourselves around certain things and around certain people. And personally, now it's known. Remember, this happened at the tabernacle with Moses, Aaron, Miriam, and God. But now it's out. Because she has to be put away. She's no longer in the camp. And so I wonder personally if maybe she's a little embarrassed by this. But here's another interesting application for all of us to make. Keep reading that verse. Miriam was shut out from the camp 7 days. And now look at the last phrase. And the people did not journey until Miriam was brought back in again. The whole camp shut down because of this. They just stayed where they were. Not only is she out there for a week, but everybody else has to stay put. And so the point is, the application is, yes, she was impacted physically. Yes, her sin had an impact on her, but it also impacted everybody there. Is there something I can do? Is there something you can do that doesn't just affect me? It affects this whole group. I think all of us would recognize that. Is there something I can do that just doesn't affect me? It would impact my entire family. You know that's possible. There are things I can do, a sin on an individual nature, that can impact Carla the rest of her life, my kids the rest of their life, and you know that. It's happening. So there's this personal thing going on with the uncleanness. There's this collective thing going on. All because of the sin. So drop back now to verse 11. What has this done to Miriam and Aaron when all is said and through? Verse 11, Aaron said to Moses, "Alas, my Lord." And starts out, "Oh, you arrogant thing. Think you are the young." Now he's calling him his Lord. "Alas, my Lord, I beseech you." He goes from complaining to begging. "I beseech you, lay not the sin upon us." He doesn't remove himself. He was a part of it, even though Miriam seems to be the leader. "Lay not this sin upon us. We have done foolishly. We have sinned." Isn't it kind of interesting? God elevating the humble. God bringing down the proud. Miriam now out in the woods, out by himself. Aaron just falling down to Moses, recognizing you're the intercessor. You are the mediator here. You are the one who speaks for God here. Please help her. Take care of this leprosy. Remove it from her. Forgive us. It was foolish. Remove the sin from us. So here's this incredible scene. To go back to where we started. Actually, let's do that. Turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 3. You've got Aaron who acknowledges Moses' position. He abandons that idea of equality. He's not singing the same tune as they were when this chapter started. No more talking about equality. Now he's going through Moses to get to God for forgiveness. And what was the problem? There was that time when Miriam and Aaron was thinking like everybody else. They were thinking fleshly. They were thinking carnal. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, are you not carnal? When there's among you strife and jealousy and envy and divisions, are you not carnal? Are you not walking like everybody else? You're walking like the world. Where's the solution? Paul doesn't throw out problems. He gives answers. Look in chapter 4, verse 6. These things, brethren, I have in a figure transferred to myself and to Apollos for your sakes, that you might learn in us not to think above that which is written, and that not one of you be puffed up one against another. Arrogance, pride, jealousy, envy. We think we should be better than them. We think we should have more praise than them. That was Moses and Aaron right there. Puffed themselves up. And Paul's dealing with that. Get your songbooks out. Just somewhat I don't know if you call it a character study, but at least we could call it a study of sin with that example. Jealousy, we know what it is. We've experienced the ugly thing in our own life, but it never goes away fully. It's always just waiting to pounce back up and raise that ugly head up. And sometimes, like with Miriam and Aaron, it comes out at the strangest of times. Something that has nothing to do with the core issue is what makes it get verbalized. God didn't take very kindly to it. And thousands of years later in the New Testament, he's still talking about humility and pride and the contrast. One he exalts, one he will tear down. We saw an example of it, living, breathing example. James 4 was not just talking hypothetically. Moses and Aaron were real. You and I are real. So let's respond. Let's humble ourselves. And let's, like Moses, let it be said of us how humble and how meek we are and can be. If anybody needs to respond in a public way, do it while we stand and sing.